Deepseek, the topic that everyone is talking about, are competing like they're going straight forward. Like when you go into their page, it says it's just as ChatGPT.
Yes.
Much.
Oh my God, the Chinese come out. Then they come up with something they claim was $6 million.
The reason why the stock market collapsed the day it was launched, wow. We have now this new model, it's way cheaper. Why are we investing in OpenAI or these kind of organizations that are spending way more money in doing exactly the same thing?
This is a learning tool. This is not passive like Google was 20 years ago.
With Deepseek, for example, if you ask about Tibet, the answer that Deepseek gave me was definitely biased.
Biased, yeah, true. Another concern people have, if I use Deepseek and I ask about this and that, is Big Brother watching me?
What's the level of questioning and what are the criteria to decide which one is better than the other? Like in the end, there's someone behind there who is receiving all this information. And that information is going to this database that is feeding the generative AI. Hi everyone, welcome to Sci-Tech Swiss, a podcast about AI, technology, and lifestyle. My name is Margarita Silva, and I'm today with Peter Moertl, our executive producer.
Hi everybody.
In another episode of Vibe Check, which is our debate format. And today we have a hot topic, which is Deepseek, the topic that everyone is talking about. We said definitely we need to talk about this.
Absolutely. Here is only, 6-7 weeks old, but yet a lot of things were happening. A couple of weeks ago, the United States announced a very huge, very large investment, over 500 billion in infrastructure investment for AI in the wonderful state of Texas, backed by a very large company like Intel and OpenAI. And that created already some waves, because if you recall the Christmas and New Year's edition we did, on the geographical developments, America clearly is number one.
Mhm.
And so we were waiting what the reactions would be. Stock markets took it very well, and it was a huge announcement. And lo and behold, a couple days ago, the Chinese raised their hand and said, "We have Deepseek."
Well, I feel it's a bit like a race kind of thing when the Russians and the Americans were racing who was reaching the moon first.
Yes, or even the space.
Or the space in general. Yeah, I think we are having exactly the same situation here. All the biggest countries in the world with the most money are investing definitely in AI because they know that this is changing the game, and they know that whoever stays behind, that's gonna affect everything.
Absolutely. I mean, it was the Americans even referred to it what's called the Sputnik effect. If you recall, well, you don't recall. I recall after the World War when the Americans and the Russians took all the scientists from the Germans, particularly Werner von Braun, who helped create NASA and the rocket system. Russians also got physics and space specialists, and Werner von Braun said, "We're going to be the first one in the space." Well, they were not. The Russians were at the time. And so it's not the Russians with AI, it's the Chinese that all of a sudden open up. I mean, on an industrial development, yes, somebody has to invent the first railroad, the first wheel, if you go back 10,000 years. And then from that, it just moves on.
It's achieved a really impressive level because it's like directly in competition with ChatGPT, OpenAI, that, as you said, it's been around for a while. But now it's just almost at the same level. They are competing, like they're going straight forward. Like when you go into their page, it says that it's just as ChatGPT.
Yes.
Much. So it's just a straight competition, and they are like its creator has been very straightforward, saying we want to be at the same level as them. We don't want to be followers anymore in terms of technology. China has been for so long a follower of whatever happens in America, then we just reproduce it. They say, okay, now we are reproducing, but we want to also lead. Exactly.
Yes. And that's a huge shift. That's a huge shift because I remember 15 years ago when my boys went to college and these are the first day welcome and whatnot, 40% were Chinese. So an incredible influx where a lot of them, and we'll talk later about the next generation of AI, Moonlight, where they're trained in America, where they get their PhD, their masters, their bachelors in American schools like MIT and Stanford and Carnegie Mellon, and go back to China and are just not the leader. So that's an incredible shift that we haven't seen before. The Chinese were always known for copy paste and do it cheaper. Now all of a sudden they seem to lead it. But let's step one step back. I mean, OpenAI 2 years ago, probably nobody ever even heard about it, right?
It's just evolving such short time,
and it just exploded. Of course, in this day and age, and it's a closed end source platform, so it's not open source. It's the second shockwave. So the first one was, oh my God, the Chinese come out. Then they come up with something they claim was $6 million, right? The inventor
to train, to create, in terms of technology, to develop it.
And Wen Feng, the person behind it, is described as little Mozart, one of those super kids, right? And he claims it's a 6 million development compared to OpenAI, which is a couple hundred millions, right?
Which is the big difference and the reason why the stock market collapsed the day it was launched, because it was like, wow. We have now this new model, which is way cheaper.
Yes.
And it's like, if we can have that same thing, why are we investing in OpenAI or these kind of organizations that are spending way more money in doing exactly the same thing?
Absolutely.
And one of the main reasons why it's cheaper in Deepseek, it's because the chips are being made in China.
Which is another big difference, right?
Exactly.
It's not the American-based chips, which is a very important Intel and whatnot, very important industry for the...
Which, by the way, decreased 17% the day it was launched, Deepseek.
Yeah.
The stocks in NVIDIA decreased 17%.
Yes.
Which it says a lot, right? Like they're saying, okay, in China, they're doing something way cheaper in terms of like maybe materials, maybe it's not as sophisticated.
Yeah.
But it does exactly the same thing. So,
and this is the big difference between an industrial revolution and this, because in industrial revolution, let's assume Mr. Ford invented the conveyor belt assembly line and whatnot, which was then copied by the Swedes, by the Japanese. It was referred to as just-in-time delivery and whatnot. So all over the world, it's used now. That takes decades. A car has 20, 30,000 parts, right? AI needs creative people and chips, basically. So the first thing you learn in business school class is that competition is defined by what capital it needs to get into the market. The lower the threshold, the more you're in the commodity market, right? You cannot differentiate anymore other than price. If you have a high level of entry, like you build an airplane, you build a train, right? That takes a lot of capital and what have you. Then this is different. The Chinese made incredible developments in those markets, in car industry, electronic cars. They run the market. They own the batteries, basically, right? Airplanes. They're building airplanes. Yeah. It's not just, it used to be the Americans with Boeing, one of the leaders. Lockheed was a big one. Then the Europeans got together with Germany and France, developing the European Airbus with Hamburg and Toulouse as production centers. And the Chinese learned that, but it still took decades. Now we're in an environment, not only is information out there in microseconds, the production of the artificial intelligence tool also. So you can imagine what kind of a flea race we're into this, right?
Yes, we're talking about efficiency. Like if we have to spend way less in building exactly the same thing, well, of course we're going to invest on that. And I think another important issue here is the fact that the creator, he has a financial background, and he created a hedge fund that uses, it uses AI to predict how the markets are going to behave.
Yes.
Therefore, it helps investors to make wise decisions. And that is also a huge game changer because he is competing with all these Silicon Valley guys who don't have that background. Exactly. Yeah. They are more on the technical, scientific side.
Yeah.
but then this guy has both sides.
Yes.
And that's interesting because he also is playing around with that. His knowledge about the stock market is playing a role in all this situation.
He understands that. And that's a very important point you mentioned here, because one of the challenges you have as an engineer, at the end of the day, that's what they are. They're very deep and a mile deep and an inch wide, because they're very, very deep down in their logarithms and what have you. Yet, in order to appeal to an investor group, you have to understand the rhythm of the markets. What is an IPO, and how do I get the money, and how do I get the funding and whatnot? And this is an interesting combination. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs is the best comparison. Steve Jobs was a very street smart marketer with Apple, with Wozniak on his side to be the deep guy. So he was the marketing guy, and therefore was appealing to the market as an investable asset. Bill Gates, very much by his stature, but also had a geek on his side, right? That did the development of Microsoft. So it needs both talents. And with Wen Fang, we seem to be Mozart and the manager of Mozart, right? So he writes the symphony and he sells the symphony.
And he sells it, yes, exactly.
Mozart had his father Leopold, so so the rhythm is clear. The time is interesting. The time to market, as they call it in the business world, is changing dramatically. Huge wake-up call for everybody, the Europeans that are behind the curve anyway. I mean, in Europe, we talked about this at Christmas, that Europe just had a hard time sort of grasping the concept of AI. They did come out with an initiative. Miss von der Leyen was talking about 50 billion euros to be invested, so a tenth of what the Americans did. And in hindsight, and that also goes back to the classical business case study. One is monopoly, like the post office, right? You want to have a stamp, you have to go to the post office. Well, AI is not the post office, but we handled it like the post office, right? OpenAI and the Stargate, whatnot. It's like we own it, right?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden somebody says, me too. And if me too, with a low threshold of entry, is combined with a high demand, it's totally redefining supply and demand, if you will. So if the Europeans learn anything, I would go to Beijing if I were European. I wouldn't go to Texas anymore. I would go to Beijing and say, how can we copy paste that as Europeans?
Yes. Well, now, actually, one of the things we need to analyze is also what it implies in terms of security, right? Because
data, who owns the data?
Yes,
where's
because
the data
that's where the problem has come. Okay, because the very first day, everyone was impressed. Everyone was downloading the app,
yes,
etc. They wanted to compare, which we have also done. Like we have used Deepseek, we have used ChatGPT, and we can say they were pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Like even the platform, like when you go in there, you have exactly the same structure. You have a chat, and the dynamic is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
You feel like you are talking to another human, even though you know it's not a human, it's a machine.
Yeah.
But the communication is pretty much straightforward. It's just like talking to another human. And in that sense, most of the generative AI applications nowadays work very similarly. So in terms of like the presentation, yes, how you use it and so on, it's pretty much the same. Now, what changes? Obviously, the content or the kinds of answers that you might have will be different, because obviously one has been trained in one way and the other one has been trained with different resources.
What we call the bias, remember?
So we talked about this before, exactly.
Yeah.
And what we have said is precisely, this is created by humans.
Yes,
and
in a certain culture, in a certain geography,
in a certain
of a certain
context.
religion, of a certain ethical belief. Let's put it this way.
Exactly. Yeah. So obviously with ChatGPT, we have already found some bias and some, like, for example, if you ask ChatGPT about politics, about many things, sometimes you get a very
tilted,
diplomatic, and sometimes it's very diplomatic and it kind of avoids to answer certain things.
Yes.
Other times, yes, we have an answer that might be taking sides.
Yeah.
But with this one, it's a Chinese app. Obviously, if you ask Deepseek about anything related to Chinese politics or, strikes or this kind
Parts
of polemical,
of China. Yeah.
Exactly, it actually gives you an answer that we could say Yes, it's a bit, yeah, it's biased. It's
So
definitely biased.
this is one way to look at it. I mean, in one of the vibe checks we did talk about ethics and the bias in a very objective way. It's just the way it is, right? If I'm sitting here in Switzerland and I develop something, let's say chocolate, there's a certain culture behind how to produce chocolate in Switzerland. If I now move to the Congo and I say I want to be a chocolate producer, different climate, different taste, and what have you. So it's a natural bias. Very important to keep that in mind. The other one, if I take the TikTok example, right? Huge debates in America about it, banning it and what have you. Europe is still not decided on which side it's going to flip because there it was about we're leaving our footprint with the country who owns the data and manages the data. And so this is another concern people have. If I use Deepseek and I ask about this and that, is Big Brother watching me? And said, why is Margarita always asking me about this and that, right?
And the funny part is we've had this same question with all the other generative AI applications because with ChatGPT, it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
If you are writing emails for your company and you are managing sensitive information, you are providing that information to ChatGPT.
Yes.
And they claim to be handling responsibly.
Cryptic, like WhatsApp.
And we are all pretty much
believers.
Yeah, believers. Yeah. But right now, the situation is, Australia, for example, banned Deepseek from all the government systems.
So did the Americans. Texas.
So did Americans. And Italy banned it completely.
Right away, yeah.
But then, yes, the question, one question is just an open question is, why is it happening with the Deepseek one and not also with ChatGPT and all the other ones? Like, what's the level of questioning and what are the criteria to decide which one is better than the other? Like, in the end, there's someone behind there who is receiving all this information. And that information is going to this database that is feeding the generative AI.
This is a learning tool. This is not passive like Google was 20 years ago. When I ask about a restaurant, Google might or might not remember. Now all of a sudden we have a thinking, learning. Oh, Peter's interested in those restaurants. Let's promote
because
what have you.
What they feel is that what the experts say is like, if you provide this information to, let's say I work in company Cloud.
Yeah.
Called Cloud. And I write, yes, Cloud is managing right now a budget of this amount of money. If someone else in, I don't know, whatever, ask about how much budget is Cloud managing.
Yeah.
It's going to take the information from there. It's being provided by someone who works inside that company. And then the company maybe doesn't even know that this person is using the generative AI. So
we are at an interesting crossroad. If you sort of lean back and see what's going on in the trade market, right? The world trade, right? I'm selling you steel, you buying my cars and type of thing. The whole, tariffs that some countries are imposing by sort of controlling their production, what have you. That's the old model, right? Tariffs are basically yesterday's news because they require that that steel is produced, is put on the truck, put on the boat, shipped to me, put on the truck, and in the car factory it goes. So it has the long value chain, still driving the economy type of thing. What we are talking about here is information control. How do you do that? Do you put a tariff on TikTok? Do you put a tariff on Deepseek because it has Chinese roots, and then the Chinese put tariffs on ChatGPT because it has American roots? Because we're talking about information is power.
That's just what I was going to say. I was just about to say that.
And we're now living it. So it's an interesting crossroad with the old world, with the long value chains and the boring production thing that gives billions of people work and what have you. All of a sudden, it's the information part that's driving it much faster.
Which, by the way, the information has been owned to some extent by the media for so long.
Yes.
Nowadays, yes, they still own it.
Yes.
But also now we have these companies that are managing information, and the way we are learning, like kids are growing up with generative AI.
Yes.
They're using it every day to do the homework, etc., to interact with it. So we go back to what we talked about a couple months ago, which is the ethical aspect.
Yes.
Is we just really need to make sure that in all these projects that there's always an ethical team making sure that whatever information is being given or fed to the generative AI, that to make sure that it's ethical, that it's not biased, this kind of thing. So we need to really be careful, because there's bias. For example, we've talked about this with gender, with race, with many.
With the example of, I think, a couple of years ago, where Amazon was looking for some engineer or logistic person, and they put it in a way that only men could apply. But if we sort of lean back, and we talked about education before, it really is a circle, because on one hand, AI will educate our kids more and more. Universities still will educate the engineers that do both. Build boats, build airplanes, build cars, so the heavy stuff that we trade with, but also information technology, right? So there we have, and where are those schools, right? So we need to invest both in what my 6-year-old is learning in elementary school through AI, have an ethical understanding what information is provided, all the way up to the engineer, the lawyer, the doctor around that, both the traditional, the goods that you can touch and trade, information technology. And then as this information technology person goes into the AI business and in the information technology business, there again, the ethical standards that he or she learned in America or in Europe or in China, wherever. So it's a huge circle and a huge challenge for the governments. And clearly the message is, what a government can do and is good for is invest in talent. Right? The MITs, the Stanfords, the Harvards of this world, ETH here, other, LSE in London, other universities in China. So far, the Chinese are exporting the talent to America mostly, some to Europe to learn, Australia to learn, and then to come home. So they incentivize them to come home. Some stay, like me. I stayed on Wall Street because I thought that's more fun than Europe. But let's assume, that person goes back from Sydney or Zurich or Boston to China to then create and hopefully keeps that values that he or she learned in what I would call the free democratic environment, right? So that's a huge challenge the governments are facing. And this is really a role where government comes in. The second one we discussed also in the ethical part is the control issue of the government, right? The European Union came up with, the Americans call it censorship, but it's basically control issues as to what you can put fake news and what have you on the social media channels. Europeans traditionally being more conservative, being less of the pioneers than the Anglo-Saxons and the Latinos and maybe by now the Asians, have a more of a, liking to control it. But I think it's a good thing. I think that the checks and balance, as it's called in the United States, that's a good thing. That's how America was founded, saying there should be a judicial system, an executive system, and they shouldn't mix it, right? There's a judge who judges, and there's somebody who executes, and there's legislator that is it. And I think it's a healthy system, this checks and balance.
Well, now that you are mentioning the bright side, like the good thing in all of this is that we have competition.
Yes.
And the competition is positive.
Yes.
Why? Because it gives more options to people. It gives us a different angles, different views. The more the merrier.
Different suppliers can come in. Prices are coming down. So from a consumer aspect, it's a good thing.
It's a good thing. And
from production, it's a challenge.
It's a challenge. But yes, well, like in terms of content, for example, as thinking on the user side.
Yeah.
The good thing with this is you also could experiment and do the same task in 2 or 3 different AI, generative AI apps, and see the difference and see the results. And you can also make your own choice. Pretty much the same with everything, right? Yes. Like you try a toothpaste and then you try another one and then you try another one. And then you say, you know what? I like the first one. I like the second one. I will keep going with this one. Yes. So that's a good thing also, because you can, and this is really important, is we need to work on our judgment We need to really pay attention, right? For example, what I did with Deepseek this morning made me question. Okay, there are some things that maybe, if especially if I'm talking about historical facts, I might get a very straightforward, politicized answer here, not a neutral answer. Which, as a journalist, for example, I would be looking for something a bit more neutral.
Yeah,
but that's me. Some people might see it in a different way. The good thing is we have options and we can decide. So that's the
yes. You
the
have
good side of
options.
it.
There's competition drives down the price. The development is encouraged. Business model is a challenge because if you redefine the entry into the market and AI becomes a commodity like pork bellies and orange juice that are traded in Chicago and in Delhi and what have you, it's another trading mechanism than you have in the classic US stock or German stock and what have you. So that's clearly one aspect. We have a new entry, as I think we mentioned before. That's not, Deepseek is not the last version that came out of China. The latest, I think, a couple of days ago, Kimi AI. They came out with a gentleman by the name of Yang, Zilin Yang. He got his PhD in technology at Carnegie Mellon, which is a wonderful university in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Which confirms what we discussed before, that the Chinese were very smart, sending their people to the top universities around the world and attracting them back home. So we see the value of education. You mentioned education before in the AI environment. Now, I grew up, for instance, in Austria, and when I learned history in high school, in elementary school, we did include certain parts of the history, which, for instance, my German friends did not. So my generation, if I were to have gone to high school in Germany, they would stop at 1933. They didn't bother doing the rest there, and they came back so they sort of blanked out whatever happened between 33 and 45, right? We did, because we had a different relationship, right? Austria was annexed. We didn't come out with it, even though he was an Austrian, but that went under, if you will. So even in the analog world, every country, and I'm sure you're from Colombia, I'm sure if I read about Colón or about Amerigo Vespucci, from a Colombian historian to an Argentinian historian to a Spanish or Portuguese teacher.
Oh, definitely.
Columbus was Portuguese for the guy in Lisbon, right? Even though he was from Spain.
Actually, that's a very important point, and this is something that every time we talk with the experts, they mention this: is we need to see things in perspective.
Yes.
Every time we have a different technology coming up, for example, when Wikipedia was out, people were going crazy and saying, "Oh my God, the libraries are going to disappear." Now we know that it didn't happen. No. So same with AI, and then what you are mentioning is just a different way of doing things, but everything will keep evolving, I think, and that's important to keep in mind, like to keep the perspective.
And there's always space for analog, right? I mean, for every Kindle that Amazon came out where you don't need a book anymore, well, book sales are fine. For any newspaper that doesn't have to be printed anymore, well, they're still printed every day. I'm not hanging on to old cliches, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah, books are still being sold. When, same, when the Kindle came out, people say, oh my God, paper is going to disappear, books are going to disappear. Not the case.
The good thing is that our synapses both respond to instinctive things like the smell of a book and the touching that creates psychological comfort. And that's so wired that will not change. However, the brain also has sort of this addiction part where if it's, instant gratification, I need to know exactly now in 1 second what house in Spanish means. I get that too. So thank God our real intelligence, not the artificial intelligence, I would call it the old fashioned or the analog intelligence, the real intelligence still can differentiate between what's needed, the touch, the smell, to make a judgment, and also having the synapses to do that. So I think the big headline is, what did we learn the last couple of weeks? Market exists, competition is there. To look at AI like Ford looked at his Model T over. But this is where we're already in the 30s and 40s when the Germans came out and Maybach came out and Dodge came out and, Lamborghini came out and Maserati and Enzo Ferrari.
Yes.
I mean, all these guys were inventing the car all over again and refining it, and it was competition.
And look, there is history has taught us that, like there is this big company or big thing that it's, like dominating the market.
Forever.
And then
disappears.
At some point, something else comes. Like, we had Blockbuster, and Blockbuster was all around the world. Then suddenly now we have Netflix. Yes. And now we have Netflix and, so that's also something that it's important to companies to keep in mind in terms of AI. AI is evolving faster than anything else in history. Like all companies, like maybe, for example, Blockbuster, how many years did we have Blockbuster?
10, 15 years, maybe.
Yes.
By the time they expanded, a CD came out, and then after CD, the streaming came, and they were out of business.
But yeah, the thing with AI is just new apps are being created every single day.
Yeah.
And they are tending to be more specialized. If you want to create an image, if you use ChatGPT, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
But if you use something else like DaVinci or any of the other apps that are specialized in creating images, the quality is going to be way better.
Yes.
And it's because obviously it's just specialized in that specific thing. And now we have apps for creating video. We have apps for creating sound. We have absolutely anything. Whatever you want, you're going to find an app with AI managed that is going to do it. So it's important also, and this is also the message, is AI is not going to stop anytime soon. It's going to keep evolving at a very fast speed.
Yes.
And for us as users, we need to keep up. We need to be learning every single day. And I think people are aware of it because the other day I went to a conference in the University of Lausanne.
Yes, interesting.
It was around 600 people.
Yeah.
And I thought I was going to probably find a lot of students, people my age or people in the 20s.
Yeah, millennials. Yeah.
Lots of 40 and 50 and teachers who are working with AI and they're keeping up with it and they know how it works and they just want to learn how to improve every process they work on with AI. So that's the right way to go.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful definition of Darwin's survival of the fittest, which wasn't created by him. It was created by journalists. But what he was saying is the one who adapts to change the fastest will survive. So if you're a dinosaur, a meteor hits, and we're talking about a 10-kilometer meteor, right? I mean, compared to the Earth, it was nothing. But it wiped out a whole dinosaur generation because they were too big and didn't fit in the concept anymore. And they didn't have enough time to adapt to new situations like the mammals could. So it's everything. The velocity of change does increase. It will have effect for us socially. It has a political impact for many, many reasons. It has an educational impact. It forces us really to keep an open mind. As you say, checks and balance, having a reasonable thinking about it. And as a father of 4 children, my question is, we created value by producing things you could trade, tangible things, right? This chair we're sitting on and what have you. As we now develop this new easy entry environment, will there be enough space for our kids to create value that will help them pay their retirement in 60, 70 years? So we are living in very, very tumultuous times. I like them. It's fantastic. A lot of streams back and forth and more to come, I would say, huh?
Yes, definitely. I think the big conclusion of all of this is we will keep seeing evolution.
Yes.
We will keep seeing new apps. New countries are going to enter the race, that's for sure.
Yes.
We are still waiting for Europe to jump in.
Yes, still way behind the curve.
Yes, but definitely interesting to analyze and to keep track of it. And if you haven't used Deepseek, this is the moment to go and try. It's always good to try new things and make your own judgment about it. And see if what we are talking, you agree with us or not.
Or not. Wonderful.
Yes, or not. Tell us in the comments.
Call us, contact us, join our 1 million watches.
Yes, and leave us in the
Fantastic.
comments what's your experience with all this generative AI. You like it, you don't like it, you think it's necessary or not. Just tell us. And thank you so much for being here today with us. Peter, thank you so much. It was a pleasure as usual.
Yes, wonderful.
And we hope to see you again soon.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.